Hello, so today we're going to be talking about stats. This is going to be a stats guide with a little bit of a set 14 flavor, basically how to read stats, how to use stats to better your set 14 experience, and all the questions you can possibly have about stats. I'll try my best to go through them as detailed as possible and answer as much of those through this video as possible. If you like my content, make sure to like and subscribe. I do daily TFT guides, so if you're looking to improve at set 14 and basically have hit the ground running, get some good ideas of fundamentals and different concepts of TFT, this would be a great channel to subscribe to, and it does help me out as a content creator, so please do so. If you're a returning viewer, if I helped you out in the past, it does make a big difference to me. Now, let's talk about stats. Before we talk about stats, I would like to make very clear that I advocate a lot that I like to use stats in order to learn, in order to improve, in order to optimize. However, stats are not for everybody. If you do not have a strong fundamental grasp on the game of TFT, you should not be using stats. It is going to lead you astray. It is going to often bait you into doing bad decisions. It's also going to ruin any potential growth that you have in learning and understanding fundamentals and gaining that skill set in order to properly improve at the game, and it will turn into a crutch that might make you really hard stock or have problems in the future. Now, I say that obviously you can just do you. If you're in Iron, it's your first game at TFT and you just want to use a stat website and grind out whatever it says to do, go ahead. But we'll talk about it a little bit throughout this video. I just want to make that disclaimer early on because people don't watch the whole video and then they're going to start harassing me that I shouldn't be talking about stats because it's not useful. But it is really useful as long as you know how to use them properly. Additionally, a good checker, like a good barometer, is something like an item guide that I made. I made this item guide for set 13. As soon as my new computer parts come in and I can fix my computer, I'll be making a new item guide for set 14. So these, but more condensed, a little bit of an improved, abridged version. But if you want to check these out, this is a good barometer, right? If you watch these guides and you understand everything in the guide, then stats would make sense to you. If there's these type of fundamentals that you don't really understand, like item economy, understanding carry stacking and diminishing returns, and like when certain mana gens are better than others, and item pairings and all of that stuff, if you don't understand these concepts, then stats aren't really for you. So I used to say roughly, I think the time that I figured out how to use all of that stuff was when I was in Plat. So I always use my own example of when I was in Plat, I started looking at stats because then it kind of made sense for me to use them to better improve my gameplay. But you do you, right? That's my barometer to check. Another barometer is if I give you a random unit, you should be able to tell me 3 sets of items for that unit. If I tell you, hey, what are 3 different sets of 3 items to put on Xayah that are all going to be positive? They're all going to be an improvement. You should be able to just do that. If you can do that, then stats are good for you because you'll be able to parse out what the good information is, what the bad information is. Now, let's go through stats. So the first thing that I'm going to do is this is going to be a how to use site. Right? I'll put it up here. Bang. Let's go through it. So I'm just going to go through this site. This is tactics.tools. There's other websites. Meta TFT, I think, is one of them. There's a lot of them. I just use tactics.tools. I'm not sponsored or anything. If anybody wants to sponsor me, I'm down. I'm broke. I'll do it for very little. Trust me. So, I'm okay with any of the stat sites. I use this one because this was the one I used when I started out with TFT. It's the one that was recommended to me when I was first trying to learn stats. So it's just a tool that I know how to use best. So this is the one that I always use. But whatever stat site you're most comfortable with, go ahead and use it, whatever. But basically, on all the stat sites, you're going to see a number that looks something like this. This is the placement number. And you'll see that it says 4.22. So what does that mean? Basically, in TFT, you can place anywhere from 1st to 8th. And 4.22 is basically that number realized, right? So when you have a number, how do I phrase it? If you go first, it counts as a 1. If you go 8th, it counts as an 8. So when it says your placement is 4.22, it means on average, most of the time you're going 4th, right? So when you look at the stats, you can filter in different ways. This is filtered NA, and this is Platinum Plus right now on the current patch. Usually the stats are per patch. So in this case, of all the players that have played this configuration of Slayer, Vayne, and Zed, they have placed around 4.22, which means from good spots, from bad spots, they've placed 4.22. Now, typically in TFT, the average placement is a 4.5. So anything above a 4.5 typically means that the comp is doing well. You always assume competency, right? You assume that there's people that play the comp from a good spot, there's people that play the comp from a bad spot, there's people that hard force it, there's people that have a good spot for it, there's people that play from an average spot. On average of all the games that have been played, the placement is a 4.22, which is above a 4.5, which means this is potentially one of these stronger comps, or it's a good option. That's what that usually means. And you can see in this case on the landing page for top comps, it's showing you all the top comps, and you can see all the ones that are above 4.5 are usually ones that are pretty good, and the ones that are below 4.5 means on average you probably need a really good spot to play them. Something like, you know, if it's a reroll, you need like caretakers or like some sort of reroll augment that made it really strong, but you shouldn't necessarily like a lot of times when people look at stats, they say like, I'm not going to angle towards a comp unless it has a really good placement, right? That's like the main idea. That's like the main number that you're usually looking at. The other numbers like play rate, this just helps you know how many times this comp is played, so it usually helps you to flush out how useful and reliable the stats are. I will say a lot of the stats on these websites, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but they're mostly for inspiration. None of the stats are really concrete, like how you would like a statistic on like a research finding or anything like that. A lot of times when you're looking at stats and you're looking at numbers and you're trying to parse information from it, it's usually for more inspiration and discovery and more like kind of like looking to your peer and saying, hey, what did you do? Oh, you did that? Okay, cool. I'll try that out as well because it looks like you did pretty good. It's more like that type of conversation when you have stats, at least for TFT. In some cases, it's very clear cut because like the sample size eventually as the set progresses becomes a lot larger. As of right now, the stats are pretty much useless to me. I think most of these stats, there's not enough sample sizes or enough information to properly parse out the information in a meaningful way that will actually realize to proper understanding of the game and LP gains, because it's been like less than a week that the set has been out. There's not enough games played, there's not enough understanding of the units and how they work in order to like actually have good information yet. But of course, people use their stats starting day one, and it does help you to a certain extent. Anyways, the other numbers that are sometimes important is top 4 percentage and win percentage. This usually helps you understand the consistency of certain comps in certain situations. So for example, if a comp has a really high top 4 percentage, it usually means that it's quite reliable. So here, one of these like couple options, you'll see that the reroll lines have the higher top 4 percentage in terms of this particular filter for stats. And that's usually because the rerolls are more consistent. So a lot of times, like as you hit early, you can usually get like a top 4 a lot more easily, so that it's gonna have a higher top 4 percentage. Additionally, there's things like win percentage, and the higher the win percentage is, then that's usually like, you know, how high roll the comp is to a certain extent, or how strong it is, right? There's certain comps that have really high win percentages, and that makes it more along the lines of you going first, or maybe potentially like not going first, right? There's certain comps where it's like very skewed in certain ways, and that can give you an idea of like how consistent or like awkward the comp is. So for example, Twisted Fate, this is like a put the fries in the bag style comp. It has a lower win percentage but a higher top 4 percentage. You play it to grab an easy top 4 and get the hell out of the game, especially if it's like a really high variance game. This is something that can give you a little bit of a safer opportunity, right? Then there's other comps, like for example in this case, I'm just looking at the stats. It's not exactly how it is obviously, but Strategist Annie Nico, it has a lower top 4 percentage, so but it has a much higher win percentage, so it's a very strong comp, right? But these numbers work out to like around the same average placement, which means that it's a little bit more risky, right? So that means that for all the people that win the game with this higher win percentage, there has to be somebody on the other side of the spectrum that is losing the game or taking a large LP loss. So that's why like certain comps, this one might be one that's a little bit more risky. And a lot of reason why it's risky is because if you look at the play rate, it has a really, really high play rate, which means it's probably just like super giga contested, right? If the play rate's like 1.83, that means like on average there's 2 people playing this comp per lobby. So even though it has a high win percentage, it basically comes down to whichever one hit like the better copies of the units or the upgrades and actually like realized their full potential was probably the winner, and the other person went bot 4. That's how you get like a similar average placement as like this TF comp and a much lower top 4 percentage. Not much lower, but like marginally lower. But that's like the idea. And you can use that to evaluate certain comps to kind of get an idea of, what am I getting myself into? Is this a comp where I am, like for example, this Fiddlesticks comp, right? It has an average very close to 4.5, so it's a very mid comp. It has a pretty high win percentage because if you hit everything, you're probably in a good spot. But the top 4 percentage is pretty low. It's like a 50-50. So stuff like that is what you should look at. Either way, All these aren't super important. There are other more fine filters. This is just like the landing page, which doesn't help too much in my opinion. There's also units where you can look at particular units, win rate, play rate, stuff like that. And itemizations. You can look at items in a vacuum. This tab usually is what baits the noobs the most. Don't get baited by this. Items in a vacuum are really useless to talk about. It's always items on units, items in spot, item in situation. The only reason I ever come to this tab is if I want to look at artifacts. This is a really good resource for, like, you know, if you're trying to figure out like what a really strong artifact is on average, as well as some of the users for the artifacts. You can go to the artifact landing page and use the stats to kind of filter out who really makes good use of these items, and then using your TFT knowledge, you can use that to like try and like increase your win rate, right? That's like the main goal, always to improve at the game, understand more about the game so you do better in your games. Traits, similar to items, not super important, but it does help you to understand like what certain things like you might want to chase towards, as well as play towards. But a lot of times in a vacuum, this isn't super helpful either. And then Explorer. This is the main part where you usually use it. Basically, what you're looking at is different filters of anything. You can filter for different synergies. Like, let's say I'm looking at anima. I can filter out what is the average placement, top 4% win percentage of 7 anima. Then I can put filters, like if I have a Xayah in anima and I put her at 2-star, what the placements are, what traits, other synergies I want to put in, what items, etc. So this is the main part where you use. If you pay, I'm not advocating to pay. I never really paid for anything, and I'm not sponsored. But on a lot of these stat sites, if you buy like a premium option, you can also apply more filters like exclusions and other stuff. But that's something that's available to you, just to let you know in case you wanted to know about it. So that's like the how-to guide. Now, stats. Why? This is the big part of the question. Why would you want to use stats? This all seems really nerdy. This all seems really stupid. Why use stats? Why? Right? There's 3 main reasons why you should use stats. And it's maybe not the exact thing that you're looking for, but I'm going to say it in my opinion. The number 1 reason is inspiration. You can use a synonym of the word, but in gist, you want to figure out what is an idea that I can take with me to justify my decisions a little bit, to help me out in doing X task or winning the game or reaching my highest potential. So a lot of times you're looking at stats not to tell you what exactly is right or wrong, but more so to say, from the particular spot that I'm in and the particular situation that I'm in, what did other people do that I could use to properly cap out my board or figure out what to do, right? It's inspiration as part of the learning experience. Number 2 is discovery. So a lot of times in stats, you can discover different things. You can find, hey, that's not something I considered before. You can find certain itemizations, units, boards. A lot of times, discovery is really important in figure out like what the optimal path is given certain units and given certain spots or situations that you're in. So a lot of times stats can say, hey, based on what other people have done, the people that did this option, that took this fork in the road, got this much placement, and the people that didn't do that got this much placement, and that can help you to decide, okay, which branch in this road am I going to take? So that's like the discovery aspect. And the third thing is optimization. Now, a lot of times, people that don't really play the game much, I don't know how to describe it, I'm not trying to insult anybody, but people that just like look to stats websites, jump to number 3. Number 3 is like their main thing that they're trying to do. They just want to optimize what's BIS, what's the best thing that I can do, and giga nerd out and basically say like, I know without a doubt that this is the best thing ever because the stats say so and I'm the best player and blah, blah. Like, no, that's like the third option. Optimization is something that comes into play very late in your TFT learning experience, and it's something that is going to hinder you a lot more than it will help you. A lot of times people talk about this is BIS items, this is best items, this is best in slot, and it's really tilting to me as a content creator that's trying to make educational style content or like helpful content, because I always have to sift through 100 people that think that they know everything about the set even though it's been out for less than a week. And they're like, but the optimizations are exactly this because I saw it, and it's like, no, it's like please, can we please chill for a second? But optimization is something that matters, especially later on into a set, when the stats become a lot more refined, and when a lot of people have played the comps like hundreds and hundreds of times across many patches. That's when you can start to look at stats and really start to fine tune exactly how you can squeeze the absolute maximum potential out of every single board, every single unit, every single trait. But that's like the main idea. So now we're going to go through them with a little bit of example, and I'll talk about it. So in this case, for example, let's just take Xayah. I'm talking about Xayah. I want to make this very clear. I'm talking about Xayah, not because Xayah is a broken unit, not because Xayah is going to win you every single game. I'm talking about Xayah because it's an easier unit to understand that I can draw connections from the previous videos that I made. So we're going to use Xayah as an example here. I want to make that clear because, you know, I made a video saying, hey, this is how you play marksman. And everybody commented, don't play marksman, you should play a different comp. And I'm like, okay, now we know why I don't respond to comments that much anymore, because I don't have time to sift through that shit. But anyways, let's go to Xayah. With Xayah, you should have a rough idea of what items are good. When you're looking at items, or when you're looking at anything, you'll see this other number that I didn't mention yet called delta. I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit just to make the numbers a little bit bigger for everybody watching. So right now, I'm sorting by delta. See, so this is highest delta, lowest delta. What delta means as a column is that it's basically like a measure of the improvement, right? So when it says a minus, for example, let's just take IE, for example. I'm going to highlight the row here. I'm going to try to highlight the row. Right? Infinity edge, right? We're looking at this infinity edge row. It says it's a minus 0.32 delta. What that means is that your average placement, remember we said it's anywhere from 1 to 8, it will improve by 0.3. Now, usually minus is associated with bad. Minus is good here. Minus is good because number 1 is a smaller number. You want to go first. First is a smaller number than 8. 1 is smaller than 8. So you always want to see minus delta. If you see something that's minus delta, it means that this combination is improving. This combination improves your spot. So if you have an average of a 4.03 and then you have something that minuses that, you'll see that the average placement goes up. Now the placement is a little bit different, and this is based on 363,000 games that have been played. So this is a stat that's pretty reliable, has a really high play rate, obviously because a lot of the sample size is tied into it. And then you can look at stuff like we said before, top 4 rate and win percentage. But that's what you're usually looking for. You're trying to figure out, hey, is this minus delta on my unit? So a lot of times you'll look at a Xayah. Let's say you're making an infinity edge, right? You'll see that the average placement improves similar to the other column. And then you're sorting by the items. You can also sort by craftable items here, just so you're not like put in with other stuff. And then this is the part where things start to get interesting, right? IE is pretty obviously really good on Xayah. Now, the reason it's really good on Xayah is not because the stats say so. It's because even without the stats, you can justify that IE is really good on Xayah. And this is the part where fundamentals matter a lot. And this is where inspiration comes into play as well a little bit. But the idea is that Xayah is a marksman. Xayah gets a bunch of AD from her trait, being a marksman. So she has a bunch of AD. IE is an AD item that makes your abilities crit. If you have a bunch of AD and you give it crit chance, you're basically improving her damage output by a large margin because you're taking that base AD and you're multiplying it by infinity edge. So that's how that works. The same thing works with damage amp items, which you expect damage amp items to be good with. But that's how, like, roughly you should be thinking about your itemizations. So IE is something that makes sense that you can look towards. Now, what other items should you make? It says here that Edge of Night is really good. Should you make Edge of Night? I think most of people will look at this and say, no, that sounds really stupid, Fenrir. Why would I make Edge of Night? Edge of Night's like a frontline style item. It's something that you put on a frontline unit because it gives them extra like intangibility where they get to live. And the chances are that the reason the Delta is really good on Edge of Night is because maybe they have the Edge of Night augment that helps power it up. Maybe they're playing against a Zed, so they put Edge of Night so that their Xayah lived a little bit longer and didn't die instantly, right? There's justification for it, but it has a very small sample size. And this is more like bait stats. This isn't something where you look at it and you say, this is the best thing on the unit. Now, of course, you know, this is a more obvious case. I think most people, even if you don't have good TFT experiences, like you haven't played a large amount of TFT, that this seems like, you know, you'd look at this, you'd say, yeah, well, obviously this is just bait. Like, you know, the stats are lying to me. It's like something that's like very particular, very small sample size. So like the numbers don't make that much sense, yada, 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 right? How do you parse out the rest of this information, right? Because what if you have items that you can make a QSS, or you can make an Infinity Edge, or you can make a Hextech Gunblade, or a Hand of Justice, right? There's so many different itemizations that you can go for, that, or even a Deathblade, right? So a lot of times when you're looking for inspiration, when I say that, is not to figure out like what the perfect items are, right? It's not like I make Edge of Night because it has the lowest delta, therefore I'll get the highest average placement according to the stats. Or I'll make Last Whisper because it has the largest sample size, and therefore it's going to have the smallest delta and whatever. Last Whisper is an item that isn't really a damage item. It just spreads Sundering. So a lot of times, like late game, this will nerf your Xayah damage as well, even though it's really popular. It's just because like a lot of times with like Anima Squad, your damage is coming from like the Anima Squad trait. I'm sure if you look at more filters, that's part of the reason why Last Whisper is good. It's also a crit glove item, so it pairs well with IE. But, you know, something like a Guard Breaker is probably something you can make if you want more damage output. Something like a Deathblade, it seems really good, but this is a very high roll item to make, right? Even though it has a small delta, it's hard to justify making a Deathblade for 2 reasons. One, it just gives a lot of AD, which Xayah already gets if she's playing Marksman. The reason Deathblade is so good is because a lot of times when you're playing Anima Squad, you're either playing 2 or 0 Marksman because you're playing Aurora as a carry. So Deathblade starts to become really good on her because she doesn't get that base AD, so it'll multiply it and be really strong. But additionally, Deathblade is hard to make unless you have a lot of swords. If you have 2 swords to make Deathblade and a sword to make IE, you have 3 swords. Like, that's crazy. You know what I mean? Like, that's a lot of swords. So, of course, if you're playing an AD unit and you have a bunch of swords, of course it's going to be good to make Deathblade. It just means you have a lot of swords. If you make a Deathblade first, without properly considering your item economy, then you're just going to waste all your swords, and you're not going to have a 3rd item on the Xayah. And Deathblade isn't worth 2 items. Because if you put Deathblade here, you'll see, like, after you put Deathblade and you try and filter, the other items are going to be, like, really small sample size, or, like, other items that need sword. It says double IE is really good, right? Giant Slayer, right? Like, if you make Deathblade, you lose the opportunity to make, like, you know, other items that use swords. You have to be really cautious about your item economy, which goes beyond what the stats say, right? That's something that you have to play from game to game within your actual games. So that's what I mean by inspiration. A lot of times when you're looking at these, you have to say to yourself, I have an infinity edge, or you have an item that you already made because it made sense in your game. And then you have to look in the stats, and what you're looking for is between other viable options. Let's say I have an IE and I have a sword. Should I go for, you know, Deathblade? If I don't have, maybe I don't have 2 swords, that's really high roll, right? Giant Slayer is pretty good. Why is Giant Slayer good? Because it's damage amp, right? You have base AD, damage amp from Giant Slayer, crit chance from IE, you multiply your damage, it makes sense. Giant Slayer. Guard Breaker is also good. Double Infinity Edge, it also says is okay, with a similar-ish or a decent enough sample size. It's not to say this is justifiably the right build, but it's more so to say, with the components that I have, what would be a viable option that I can use here in order to cap my board a little bit better? Because, you know, if I have a sword and I can make either, you know, this item or this item or this item or this item, I'll take the one that makes the most sense to me. Giant Slayer has a really good delta, right, compared to the other ones, and it has a really large sample size, which means it's a little bit more of like a proven number. So if I have the component of 1 extra sword, I'll maybe go for Giant Slayer instead of like one of the other options. That's like the idea. And I made a very simple example because it's Xayah, but this can apply to every single unit. You're not going to know the perfect items for every single unit until much later in the set. So a lot of times, it's just a matter of like inspiring yourself. It's saying to yourself, it doesn't matter what the exact statistics are and the exact numbers. It's saying, in my given spot in a game, how can I make the most of this? And then you look at it and you say, well, that's something, right? Because I'm considering multiple options here. I'll just consider the option that makes sense with what I saw here. That leads a lot into discovery. Discovery can help in terms of like figuring out what board is good. So in this case, we have a Xayah. Let's say you have a game where you have a Xayah. This is where discovery comes into play. What should you play with Xayah? So a lot of times you can look at units, for example. If you look at Xayah, the units that are good, Viego, Garen, obviously the 5 costs are always going to be skewed, because if you hit a 5 cost, it means that you're high enough level to be able to afford to put the 5 costs on your board, which means that, like, you know, you're probably like in a good spot. You know what I mean? If you look, Aurora, really high minus delta, almost a whole entire average placement, getting increased, really high top 4 win percentage. A lot of that's because of Anima Squad. But the idea is like, what units should I want to play? What should I build around this Xayah to best support this Xayah as a damage dealer? And if you look, you can look between units and traits, and you can see that, okay, like a lot of the times, you can see like a lot of times it's like 2 Dynamo, 2 Bastion. These are traits that fit in with the Anima trait, especially. And you'll probably see like 7 Anima Squad being really good. you'll see that it's a little bit better than some of the other traits, right? Like, another board that you can play with it, I talked about it when I was talking about marksman, is vanguards. You'll see that like 2 vanguards is better than 6 vanguards and 4 vanguards. Why is that? Well, it's just because like 2 vanguard just means that you're playing anima, right? It just means that you're playing like anima squad. See, if you look at anima squad, 10 anima, obviously that's broken. 7 anima, really high sample size, it's really good. It has a minus delta. The other versions of anima, 3 and 5, are a little bit worse. So if you're trying to play around Xayah, a good suggestion would be maybe play anima with Xayah. That's like an idea. I want to mention that here as well, because like we're just talking about discovering and trying to figure out what's the best thing. This is like a case, like let's say you're in a game and you get dropped an early Xayah and you don't know what to do. You can look and discover with stats to figure out, hey, based on what other people are doing, those 250 people are doing on average better than the other 100,000 people that are doing something else. And of course, the stats can skew differently. They could be different because obviously the numbers are going to be small and they're going to be like wacky, especially at the beginning of the set. But the idea is that you can try and discover what you can do to best fit your board. And that leads into the third reason to use stats, which is optimization. So optimization is like the final thing that puts everything together, which is how can I get the most out of everything? So you can look for it for inspiration, just say, okay, like given these circumstances, what should I do? You can use it for discovery, like given my certain circumstances, what's like the best option based on what other people are doing. And then you could also look at it for like, how can I make this line as optimal as possible? And this is usually what you use as a learning experience. That's where you start to look for what BIS items are. BIS means best in slot, is just a way of saying these are the perfect items that do the best amount of damage for a unit, and all this other stuff. These are things that aren't going to fit in particularly amazingly depending on your board. So for example, here I put IE on Xayah. You'll see the Shojin is plus delta. A lot of times you go for triple damage. If you're going for triple damage, you're usually playing anima a lot of the time when you're doing that. But it's a matter of like trying to figure out what could I do to best put myself in the best spot possible to win the game. And if I repeat this scenario, what could I have done differently or better? And that's where optimization comes into play. It's not something that's super important because, like I say all the time, I say this to people all the time whenever they're trying to ask for advice or play games. You can't just like start the game off and say, my items are going to be IE, Deathblade, and +1, last item, whatever. Because like you don't have the items yet, right? Unless you have the items, you can't really like do this level of optimization, but it's just good to know in certain situations just so you know what to strive to make. But 90% of your games or 99% of your games, somewhere between there, you're not going to be able to make the optimal quote unquote minus delta every single time items, right? So even here, like let's say I take the next best item that makes sense kind of, which is Last Whisper. You know, it says that the best item is like Gold Collector or Deathblade, right? So what we're saying is that you need to have sword, glove, bow, glove, sword, sword in order to make Deathblade, Infinity Edge, Last Whisper. That's maybe Xayah, that might be Xayah Abyss, who knows? But the idea is like, you know, that's the optimization that you look for after a game to try and know like, hey, in the future, if I have a bunch of swords for free, like I just got dropped a bunch of swords, I'll do that. But if you look here, something like Giant Slayer, it uses less swords, is also really good. So Xayah Abyss might actually be IE, Last Whisper, Giant Slayer. And as you can see, Shojin, in this case, Shojin falls off a little bit. But it's fine, right? It's still like the plus, if it's plus by a little bit, it's like the same idea, right? If it's minus by a little bit or plus by a little bit, a lot of times they're interchangeable, right? Like it's just a matter of like how much it's improving your spot to try and give you the best opportunity to win the game. That's like the main idea with stats. So hopefully this explanation kind of helped you in your journey a little bit. You can also look at trends in stats. We didn't really talk about this, but this helps out a lot in just like knowing like what comps are really good. Like they're not out yet because obviously, but you could use them for certain units. Like units have certain trends. So for example, like Aphelios is a good example, right? Aphelios was really popular early on, but now a lot of people don't think that think that he's super good. So you can see like, you know, on average, players are playing less and less Aphelios in games. Stuff like that, just to kind of like get an idea of if your meta read is right, is another way you can use stats. But in general, hopefully I explained everything. Now, one thing I will always say, as a word of caution, is not to get super baited by stats one way or the other. I know I've already said it 100 times in this video, but I'll give you guys another example, right? Like this is but if I have to give you parting words, this is the way that you should think about stats, right? The way you should think about stats is Like let's say like for example when I was in GM, let's just put it at the highest filter, which right now, which is diamond, because there's not many people in masters, because everybody's like trying to climb to their respective ranks, right? If I take Xayah and I'm looking at it in diamond plus, you'll see that there's a very small amount of, much smaller amount of games, instead of being the hundreds of thousands to the tens of thousands. If you look at particular items and stuff like that, you'll see that the numbers start to get astronomically low. We're not trying to say that the statistics are saying one way or the other, this is 100% the good thing to do or the bad thing to do. The way you should always think about it is that the more refined you get with the statistics and the more smaller the sample size is, you're kind of thinking of it more of like looking at your peers. It's almost like, hey, I played Xayah last game. What did you put on your Xayah? And then somebody turns to you and says, I put this item on them and I got this placement. And you say, oh, okay, that's cool. I guess I'll try that out next game because you had success with it. That's the way you look at stats. When the numbers are getting smaller, these aren't stats that are justifiably true. They're along the lines of inspiration and discovery. It's a matter of like, hey, this is something that I tried out. Maybe you can try it out too. And then you try it out and you see if it works. And if it doesn't work, you say, okay, now I know. It's more so to give you an idea of which way to look at certain things, or look at certain comps, or look at certain paths that you can take, right? The fork in the road. Which fork in the road are you going to take? If you don't know which fork in the road to take because you cannot justify either side of them, you also have to analyze, why can't you justify which fork in the road? Can you not justify the fork in the road because you don't have the fundamentals? In that case, you're just going to get led by stats and you won't be able to properly figure out whether or not it's you or the stats, or are people playing it right? Are you playing it right, etc.? Or is it because like they're two viable options that make sense, right? Like for example, if I'm playing Xayah, I can go full damage amp, or I can go full crit chance, which one's better, stuff like that. You have to have a good fundamental baseline. That's the main important thing. I don't want that to be a good takeaway, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that was fine. Enjoy your experience. Have fun. See you tomorrow with another guide. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.